Phoneline's Season 0, the show featuring carefully crafted, dramatized, voicemail message-style stories of unsettling, surreal, and perhaps paranormal encounters. Without further ado, let's hear what's been left on the line.
Hey, I've been turning this over in my head for weeks, trying to figure out how to explain what's been going on in the house we just moved into. Maybe talking it out will help me make sense of it, or at least help someone else who's had something like this happen. So, my wife and I recently moved. The real estate market has been absolutely brutal for the past couple years. Rent going up, houses getting snapped up instantly, prices just sky high. We were stuck renting way too long and saving what we could, but every place we looked at was either way out of our budget or needed a mortgage we didn't qualify for. It felt hopeless for a while. Then, after months of searching, we finally found a house that fit our price range, but it was an old place. A real fixer-upper. The kind of place you see on those home renovation shows, but without the budget or contractors ready to jump in. It was a bit run down. Paint peeling, old roof, windows rattling in the wind. The listing was pretty honest about it, though. Said the last owners had moved out years ago, and it had been sitting empty since. It wasn't centrally located either. Quiet, but definitely a bit off the beaten path. We were hesitant at first, but since the price was right, and we're both young, we figured we could handle the repairs ourselves over time. The idea of owning a home was too good to pass up, especially after the nightmare of renting. The first few weeks were all work and exhaustion. Scraping paint, pulling up old carpets, fixing creaky floorboards. Every night, after a long day of hammering and painting, we'd collapse onto the couch, too tired to care about anything but sleep. We were happy, too, in a way. Finally, putting roots down, making a space ours. At first, everything felt normal. The house creaked and groaned like any old place would, especially in the cold wind or after a storm. But then, about a month in, something happened. Something subtle. We had started working on the attic. It was unfinished, dusty, filled with insulation, and had this weird smell, like dry rot or maybe just years of stale air. We were up there to clear it out and maybe lay down some flooring to turn it into storage space. There was this one beam kind of tucked behind a load-bearing wall. Looked like it had been reinforced at some point. Nothing special about it at first glance, except there was a single, big, rusted nail right in the middle of it. Long, bent slightly. Looked handmade, actually, not like the stuff you'd find in a hardware store. I remember noticing it because it looked out of place, like someone had hammered it in long after the beam was installed. It wasn't securing anything, just there. Deeply embedded, that too, but in a totally random spot. So, without thinking much, I pried it out. It took some effort. When it finally gave, the whole beam made this deep groaning sound like it didn't want to let go. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whole house was noisy, not like wind or settling boards. This was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone pacing in a tight circle just above us, over and over, same pattern. The kind of sound that wakes you up and then it doesn't let you drift off again. My wife heard it too. She thought maybe a raccoon had gotten into the attic, but I was already thinking about the nail. Next morning when I got up, the first thing I noticed, no joke, was that nail sitting right on my pillow. I hadn't brought it down. I'm sure of that. I'd left it on the attic floor. It was clean. No rust, like it had been scrubbed or sanded down overnight. Smooth, dark iron, cold to the touch. I didn't tell her. I didn't want to scare her. I just pocketed the nail and tried to shake it off. Told myself I must have absent-mindedly brought it down and forgotten. But that night, it started again. Not just the pacing. There were these soft, hollow thuds, like knocks, but not at the door, not on any walls. They came from the attic floor directly above our bedroom. 4 knocks, then silence, then pacing, then the same knocks spaced perfectly like some kind of signal or routine. Every night after that, same thing. 4 knocks, pacing, sometimes dragging sounds, like something was being moved very slowly across the attic floor. One morning I went up there early to check it out before she woke up. Nothing had moved. Nothing obvious, anyway. But the nail? Gone. Again. We kept working on the house, but things started getting weird in other rooms. Tools we'd left out would be missing in the morning and show up in places we hadn't touched yet. A paint can that was sealed the night before would be wide open, brush-dried solid next to it. A ladder moved, lights flickering. You get the idea. But the attic, that stayed the worst of it. One night, I finally decided I was done. I took the nail, because it came back again, this time in my jacket pocket, and I went up into the attic with a flashlight. I figured, maybe this is stupid, maybe it's just a weird coincidence, but I'm going to put it back. I walked over to the beam. You could still see the little hole it had left. And I swear to you, I felt this pressure in the air, like being underwater or inside a thick storm cloud. My ears popped. My flashlight flickered. I drove the nail back into the beam. As soon as I did, the attic went dead quiet. Like the kind of silence you only notice when something really loud just stopped. I waited, just listening, but there was nothing. No creaking, no shifting, no wind. That night, we both slept like the dead. Days passed, then a week. Everything calmed down. Tools stayed put. No footsteps, no knocks. I didn't say anything to her. What was I going to say? That our house was haunted by a nail? But about a week later, we had a home inspector over. Someone from the county who needed to approve some electrical upgrades we were doing. Guy was nice, old school type, took his time. At one point, he glanced up at the attic door and said something like, "Interesting place you got here. A lot of these older homes have history, you know?" I asked him what he meant, and he just shrugged and said, "You'd be surprised what gets left behind in beams and walls. People used to seal up all sorts of things, mementos, charms, warnings." Then he looked at me, serious, and said, "If you ever find something like a nail or a coin or even a shoe, best leave it where it is. Those weren't meant to be moved." I didn't sleep that night. I'm just glad there's been no more pacing, no knocks, no strange movements. And I hope it stays that way.
Hi. Yeah, I don't know if this is really worth sharing, but it's just been on my mind. And maybe you've heard something like it before. So, I'm a college student, and earlier this year, I finally got to do a semester abroad. It's something I'd been working toward for years. Extra classes, extra shifts at the bookstore, saving every bit I could. I picked Europe because I wanted to work on my language skills, but also because, I don't know, I've always been fascinated with old things. Where I'm from in the States, we call a building old if it's from like the 1950s. Over there, you can walk past places older than my entire country just to get groceries. I loved that idea. It made history feel closer. When I arrived, the school placed me in student housing, but it wasn't the shiny new dorms most of the other foreign students got. Mine was an older building a few blocks from campus, tucked down this narrow cobblestone street. Honestly, it looked like something out of a painting. Tall, narrow windows with warped glass, faded wooden doors that must have been opened and shut 1,000 times before I was even born. I didn't mind that it was older. In fact, I was thrilled. I wanted to feel like I was living history, not just looking at it from a tour bus window. The inside was, well, it had character. Creaky stairs, plaster walls with hairline cracks, the faint smell of dust, and something faintly herbal, like dried flowers. My little room had a single bed, a desk, and a window that overlooked the street. I could see the rooftops sloping away and the spire of a church just a few blocks over. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect for me. The only problem was the language. I'd studied it in school, but classroom language is different from real life, and the local dialect was tricky. People spoke fast, dropped words, used slang I'd never heard. Most of the time, I just nodded and smiled, hoping I'd caught enough to follow along. About a week after I moved in, I started hearing something. The first time was late at night. I'd stayed up too late reviewing vocabulary, and I was in that weird, heavy-eyed state where you're not quite awake but not asleep yet. I heard this soft whispering outside my door. Not like someone having a normal conversation. It was lower, almost like chanting, but too quiet to make out. At first I thought it was one of the other tenants talking on the phone in the hallway, but when I got up and opened the door, nothing. The hallway was empty. All the other doors were shut, and the whispering? Gone. I figured maybe I dreamed it. A few nights later, it happened again. Same time, late enough that the whole building should have been asleep. This time, I sat up fast, heart pounding, and I grabbed the little notebook I kept by my bed for language practice. I pressed my ear to the door and tried to catch the words. I couldn't understand them fully. My brain felt slow, like it was still tangled in sleep, but I wrote down the sounds as best I could. The voice, if it was a voice, was soft and even, like someone reciting lines they'd said 100 times before. The next morning, I went through all my phrase books and dictionaries. Nothing matched exactly. A few words looked close to the language I was studying, but not quite right. The endings were strange. The sounds shifted in ways I didn't recognize. I decided to ask my professor after class. She's one of those people who's forgotten more about languages than I'll ever know, so I figured she'd at least be able to tell me if it was just a regional dialect. When I showed her my notes, she got this odd look on her face. Not alarmed exactly, but curious. She asked me to say the words out loud, and when I did, she nodded slowly and said, "That's old. Very old." Turns out the words weren't in modern usage at all. They were from an older form of the language, one I'd never studied. Maybe even older than the building itself in some parts. She told me the words I'd written were the first line of a local prayer, one that had been used in monasteries hundreds of years ago. That's when I found out the building where I was staying used to be part of a monastery. My room was in what had once been a dormitory wing for monks. She laughed it off, saying maybe one of the neighbors was just very dedicated to their history, but she also admitted it was strange for someone to recite it in the middle of the night in the exact hallway where monks used to walk. After that, I didn't hear it for a while. Weeks went by, and I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd just been catching pieces of conversation or the way the wind moved through the old hall. But then, right before the end of the semester, it happened one more time. Louder this time. Clearer. I stayed in bed, listening. The voice didn't move away like before. It was right outside my door the whole time, the prayer repeating, soft and steady, for what felt like minutes. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was dark and empty again. I told myself it could have been a neighbor, or maybe sound carrying strangely through the old building. But every time I think about it, I remember how steady the voice was, how unbroken. No breathing between lines, no sound of footsteps. Just that ancient prayer in a language nobody uses anymore, in a building where it had been spoken centuries before. I left at the end of the semester, and unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to go back. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed late at night here at home, I start to think about what I heard in that building, the words on the other side of the door, and I swear I can almost hear it again, like it followed me back across the ocean.
Hey, I've been listening for a while, and I finally decided to call in because I've got a weird one for you. It was during lockdown. I lived alone in a tiny apartment, one of those old buildings where the walls are so thin you can hear your neighbors breathing. I was working from home, barely seeing anyone in person, and the isolation started to get to me. You'd think being surrounded by people, even just through the walls, would help, but it was the opposite. The silence between sounds felt suffocating. It was just little things, faint murmurs through the vents. It didn't strike me as odd. At first, I just figured someone nearby was on the phone or had their TV turned low, but I started to notice it always seemed to happen late at night when everything else in the building was still. The voices were just on the edge of my hearing, too soft to make out words, but I could tell they were voices. More than one. Whispering. One night I decided to really listen. I turned off everything. My laptop, my fan, I even unplugged the fridge to silence its low hum. The building was dead quiet. Then, after a long pause, the whispering started again. This time, I pressed my ear against the vent. My skin prickled. It wasn't just random murmuring. It almost sounded like someone was saying my name. I jerked back so fast I nearly fell over. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe it was the neighbor's TV after all. Maybe I was just imagining things, my own thoughts rebounding in the silence. But I didn't turn anything back on. I just sat there, waiting. Then the whispers came again. My name, stretched and drawn out like whoever was saying it wanted to make sure I heard. The voice was soft, but something about it was wrong. It was like listening to someone speak from another room, but the acoustics didn't make sense. It wasn't coming from above or below. It was coming from inside the vent. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it had to be a trick of sound, some weird echo carrying from another apartment. But after that night, I started hearing it all the time. The whispers would rise and fall, just low enough that I could never quite make out what they were saying, but always there, always waiting. Then things escalated. One evening, while I was brushing my teeth, the water started running light brown. Rust, I thought. Old pipes. But then I heard it, soft but unmistakable, my name seeping through the vent above the sink. I shut off the water and bolted from the bathroom. The next day I called my landlord, asked if the vents connected to another apartment. He told me no. Each unit was separate. No shared airways. That didn't make sense. Someone had to be on the other side. Someone had to be whispering. I stopped sleeping. I started leaving the TV on at all hours just to drown out the sound. But it didn't matter. The whispering kept coming, growing bolder, more insistent. One night, just as I was dozing off, I heard something that made my blood run cold. We're coming through. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. The voice was closer, too close. As I was sitting there, upright in my bed, I heard it again. Not a whisper, not a name, just breathing. Long, slow, just on the other side of the vent. I barely breathed for the rest of the night. I kept my eyes locked on the vent, half expecting something, someone, to crawl through. But nothing happened. Just the whispers. The next day I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. I didn't even explain why. Just said I needed a break from my apartment. I stayed away for a full week, and when I finally worked up the courage to go back, the air inside felt different, lighter, normal. I convinced myself that whatever it was, it had been in my head. A product of stress and isolation. Hey, I'm calling again. It's me, the guy with the vents, the one with the sounds. I stayed in that apartment, and, I really shouldn't have. Well, I thought it was over. I was wrong. Yeah, I know, I said last time that it stopped, but it didn't. It just waited. I thought leaving for a week had fixed it. I thought I was over the stress that caused it, or at least that whoever had been whispering through the vents had lost interest. The silence had stretched long enough that I convinced myself it had been in my head. Mental strain, isolation, the weird tricks your brain plays on you when you spend too much time alone. For months, the apartment was quiet. Then last week, I woke up to a voice calling my name from inside the vent. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The sound had been faint, but unmistakable, carrying that hollow, tinny quality of something bouncing through metal ducts. I told myself I had imagined it. I had to have imagined it. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, ears straining, it happened again. Hey, it was just barely a whisper. I pulled the blankets tighter around myself and stared at the vent across the room, half hidden in the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I avoided the vent. I got up, made extra coffee, went about my day as normally as I could. Maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe it was some weird auditory distortion. I told myself a lot of things. Then that night, it happened again. It started as a whisper, soft, distant, like someone was standing just on the other side of the wall, just out of reach. I couldn't make out words, just the faint murmur of something speaking. Then, clearer this time, 2 syllables. My name. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. The whispering continued, a low hum threading through the room. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the vent. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and slowly approached. The metal grate gleamed under the beam of light. I knelt down, hesitating for a long moment before speaking. Hello? The whispering stopped. The silence pressed against my ears. I stared at the vent, waiting, heart pounding. And then, just as I started to pull back, "Why did you leave?" The voice was right there, right on the other side. I scrambled away, knocking over my nightstand in my rush to get back to bed. My pulse was a wild, stuttering thing in my chest. I didn't dare move, barely dared to breathe. I didn't sleep. The next night, it was worse. The questions continued, soft at first, then growing more insistent. "Why did you come back?" The voice wasn't just whispering anymore. It was speaking, talking to me. I ignored it. I kept my headphones in, music blasting, anything to drown out the sound. But every so often, in the spaces between songs, I could still hear it. Low, waiting. "Can I come in?" That was the last straw. The next morning, I called my landlord and gave my notice. I wasn't staying. I didn't care how much I had left on my lease. I started packing that afternoon, stuffing my belongings into boxes with shaking hands. But the worst came just 2 nights before my move-out date. I had been avoiding the vent, barely looking in its direction, trying not to acknowledge its existence. But when I passed by it that night, something made me stop. A feeling, a pressure in the air, a wrongness. I turned, slowly, and shined my flashlight through the slats. Scratches. Long, jagged gouges marred the inside of the metal, deep enough to catch the light. Like something had been clawing at it. Like something had been trying to get out. I left the room. I slept on the couch. The next morning, I started shoving the last of my things into boxes. I didn't care about organization, didn't care about what went where. I just needed to leave. I avoided the bedroom completely, avoided looking at the vent, avoided even thinking about it. By the afternoon, I was standing outside the apartment, key in hand, ready to turn it over to the landlord. The sun was bright, the air crisp, normal. The world felt normal again, and I let myself believe that once I handed over the key, it would be over. And then my phone buzzed, a notification from my smart home app. Motion detected in bedroom. I stared at the screen, blood running cold. The apartment was empty. I was standing outside. There shouldn't have been motion. My finger hovered over the app, over the option to view the camera feed. Then I slowly lowered my finger down, not to open the app, but to delete it. I figured it was probably a dirty raccoon or something. But after all I had been through, I wasn't going to risk taking a peek. I turned around, walked to my car, and never looked back.
Hello, yeah, well, I've got something for you. Never really told it properly before, not outside of a few mates down the pub, but I still think about it. More than I'd like, actually, and maybe talking about it here will help. I don't know. So, this happened a few years ago when I was still living in the countryside. Small village, you know the sort. One shop, one pub, a church no one really went to, and miles of winding lanes that felt like they belonged to another time. Anyway, I used to walk home late at night sometimes, cutting across this narrow, hedge-lined lane. No streetlights, just the glow of my phone or the moon if I was lucky. It was quiet, peaceful even, until it wasn't. That night I was coming back from a mate's place. It was late, past midnight, and the sky was cloudy, so it was properly dark. The kind of dark that presses in on you, makes you hyper-aware of every sound. My footsteps echoed a bit on the wet road, and I remember pulling my jacket tighter against the cold. It was that damp, bone-deep chill you get in the countryside. Then, ahead of me, I saw it, a dog, a big one, sitting right in the middle of the lane. At first I just assumed it was a stray or a farm dog that had wandered off, but as I got closer, something about it felt wrong. It was massive, for one. Bigger than any dog I'd ever seen, more like a wolf, and its fur was jet black, like it was swallowing the light. I couldn't make out its eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. I slowed down. Something in my gut told me not to get too close. There was this awful, heavy silence in the air, like the whole world was holding its breath. Even the usual rustling in the hedges, the distant hoot of an owl, gone. Just me and this thing. I took a step back. It stood up, I swear to you, it didn't move like a normal dog. It was too smooth, too deliberate. And then it took a step toward me. That's when I ran. I don't remember making the decision. My body just took over. I turned and bolted back the way I came, not daring to look over my shoulder. My ears were ringing, my heart was hammering, and I was sure, absolutely sure, I could hear it behind me. Not running, not growling, just following, keeping pace. The sound of claws on tarmac, steady, unhurried. I didn't stop until I saw the lights of the village ahead. The second I stepped onto the main road, where the glow of a street lamp touched me, the feeling vanished. The weight, the pressure, the sense of being watched, it was just gone, like it had never been there. I turned, breathless, half expecting to see it standing at the edge of the dark. But there was nothing, just an empty lane stretching back into the night. I told myself I imagined it, that my mind had played tricks on me in the dark. But the next day, I mentioned it to an old bloke at the pub, just offhand, not really expecting a reaction. He went pale, put his pint down, shook his head and said, "You saw it then." Turns out people have been seeing that thing on the lane for years. A black dog, always at night, always watching. Some say it's a warning, others say it's something worse. All I know is I never took that route home again, not at night at least.
I heard this show the other night, and I guess it got me thinking about what's been going on out here. I live alone, outside of town a bit. Rural edge, not quite farmland, but close enough. There's woods out back, a creek runs through a ways down. Real quiet most nights. Too quiet sometimes. Anyway, it started, 6 months ago now? Maybe longer. At first, it was just my garbage cans. I'd wake up in the morning and find trash strewn all over the driveway. Banana peels, fast food wrappers, meat trays, whatever was in there, it was all out in the open, like some animal went through it. Naturally, I figured raccoons, or a coyote maybe. Common enough out here. So I bungee corded the lid shut. Figured that'd be the end of it. But the next morning, same deal. Trash everywhere. Bungees were busted, but not chewed through. Looked like someone sliced the cord with scissors. Clean cut. Kind of strange for an animal. I bought new cords, thicker ones. Same thing happened. Made a mess everywhere. So then I picked up a new trash can, heavy duty, with a locking lid. I thought, okay, this'll do the trick. And for maybe a week or two, it seemed like it worked. Then the noises started. First, it was just at night. Scratching sounds, light tapping. I thought maybe something was climbing up the siding or messing around under the porch. But every time I'd go outside with a flashlight, nothing. Totally still. I figured maybe I was just hearing things. Wind, mice, who knows. But then one morning I noticed something. The trash can was moved. Not knocked over, moved. About 3 feet from where I always keep it, dragged across the gravel. I could see the trail, and there were handprints on the lid. That's when I started feeling uneasy. Not paw prints, handprints. Small, like a tiny child's, but not quite right. Too many fingers, too narrow, almost delicate. Like something trying to be human, but not quite pulling it off. I stood there staring at them for a long while, looking over the prints. 11, 12, more. They were all over the lid, smudged into the dirt and dust. And that smell, sweet like rotting fruit, but sharp like copper. I couldn't place it, but it lingered around the can like something had been nesting there. I hosed off the cans, figured maybe it was kids messing around, though I never saw anyone nearby. I don't have neighbors close enough for their kids to wander over without being noticed. Maybe just a really big old raccoon that had gotten himself fat eating my garbage? They have weird little hand paws. Either way, I left it at that. But it didn't stop. Next week, I found one of the cans tipped completely over. Lid was off, despite the lock being latched. And the food scraps, not just scattered. Gone. Picked clean. Like something had dug through and taken only the edible stuff. Bits of shredded packaging, but no meat, no fruit, no bread, just wrappers left behind. I started watching the yard at night. Not all the time, mind you, but when I walked by, I would take a minute or two to stare out the window toward the tree line where I kept the cans. After a few nights, well,
That's when I saw them. Just shapes at first. Movement. Low to the ground, but fast. Hunched. Darting in and out of the shadows. Too fast to follow. I saw one step out a little further, just beyond the edge of the porch light. It froze when it noticed me at the window. It was short, maybe 3 feet tall, skinny with arms longer than its body. No clothes that I could see. Skin looked wrinkled like tree bark, almost gray. But the thing that really got me? The eyes, huge, way too big for its head. Shiny like wet stones reflecting the porch light. It stood there, tilting its head, just watching. And then it turned and ran fast. Too fast. It moved like something that didn't have bones. I moved the cans back by the garage, thinking maybe the lights or proximity to the house would help. But the next morning, there were more prints. Tons of them. All over the siding, across the ground, even on my back door. Tiny smudges like little greasy fingers had been tapping, clawing, pressing. Because, see, animals don't do that. Animals don't move quietly enough to never make a sound on dry gravel. I called the county, asked if anyone else had been having problems with scavengers. They told me no, nothing unusual. They said they'd look into it, but I never heard back. Things settled for a while after that, a week or two maybe. Nothing happened. And then one morning, I woke up and the trash cans were gone. Just gone. Not tipped, not dragged, gone. No drag marks, no prints, no scattered trash. I followed the edge of the woods, figured maybe I'd find them dumped in a ditch. I walked nearly a mile along the tree line. Nothing. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't replaced the cans. I started burning my trash instead. I don't know what they are. I really know how to say it without sounding completely nuts. I don't know if they're goblins or fae or something older. Maybe they're not from here at all. All I know is they're watching, and I hope they don't want more than trash.
Hi. I guess this is the number you call when things don't make sense? My cousin sent me your show, said it might help me sort through something weird I've been thinking about, or remembering, or misremembering. I don't even know anymore. Well, I've got one of those, and I've never told anyone about it. I guess I didn't think much of it for a long time, but now it's been keeping me up at night. I can't stop thinking about it. And I need to say it out loud, I think. Maybe that'll help. So, a few weeks ago, I was visiting my mom's place. She's getting older, and she's been talking about downsizing, clearing out the house, getting rid of old boxes, that sort of thing. And me being the only one close enough to help, I went over to lend a hand. It was mostly boring stuff. Old blankets, forgotten toys, half-broken lamps. So I was cleaning out the attic, and I found a few cardboard boxes tucked way in the back, behind the insulation rolls. Old photo albums, school projects, birthday cards from people I barely remember. Attic stuff. But in this one cardboard box, under a pile of yellowed papers and baby clothes, we found an old shoebox labeled tapes. Inside were a bunch of those chunky VHS home videos we used to make. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, all that. We pulled out the old player from a cupboard, hooked it up with some trial and error, and started watching. It was weirdly comforting, seeing all that grainy footage. My parents, younger, my sister and me with our pudding bowl haircuts and scabby knees. Just simpler times. But then we came to this one tape. It was labeled Summer 99. I must have been about 8. The tape started with shots of the garden, those slow pans dads always do, like they're filming a nature documentary instead of their own backyard. You could hear my mom laughing behind the camera, telling him to hurry up and focus on us kids. And there we were. Me, my sister, and my best friend at the time, Lottie. We're running through the sprinkler, squealing, wearing those garish one-piece swimsuits. I looked so happy. We were running around with plastic water guns, and we're both screaming with laughter. Then there's us making mud pies, daring each other to eat them. I must have shouted her name about a dozen times. And the thing is, I remember all of that. I remember that summer. I remember Lottie. We were inseparable. She used to braid my hair too tight and laugh when I yelled. She showed me how to hold a cricket bat like her older brother. She taught me clapping games with songs in another language I didn't understand. But then, my mom said something that made my stomach go cold. She said, "That was a good summer, wasn't it? Just you and your sister playing all day." I paused the tape, rewound it a bit, played the section again. There I was, shouting for Lottie to play with me, laughing as we slipped and fell in the mud. I looked at my mom. "What about Lottie?" I asked. She looked confused. "Lottie?" "Yeah," I said. "My best friend. The girl I'm playing with in the video." She frowned at me then. Not scared, not angry, just off. Like I'd said something weird and she was trying to place it. "There's no one else in that video, love. It's just you and your sister." I thought maybe she was joking, or maybe she hadn't been paying attention. So I pressed play again, but I didn't see Lottie. She was never captured in the footage. She was gone. I saw myself still running, still laughing, still shouting that same name, still reacting like I was being chased. The mud pies? Just one pair of hands. The giggling from the second voice, the one I always thought was hers, it was there, but quieter, fainter, like it was part of the background. I turned to my mom and asked if she could hear the second laugh. She shook her head. "Darling, I think you're hearing your own echo." But I wasn't. I know what I saw, and I knew what I remembered. I remembered her. She had a gap in her teeth. She always wore these bright rubber bracelets up to her elbow. She was real. I know she was. But now, I've watched the tape again, dozens of times. Every time, she's not there. Every time I call her name or look over at where she would have been, there's only empty space, or the place is just out of frame. So I went through the other boxes nearby, just looking to find proof that she existed. Old school photos, birthday cards, anything. But she's not in any of them. On the 13th time watching, or maybe it was the 14th, I was rewinding the tape again, squinting at the fuzzy, jittering image on the screen, when I thought I saw it, just for a second. An arm, pale and thin, darting into the frame from the left, bare except for a cluster of brightly colored rubber bands snug around the wrist. My heart leapt. I hit pause, rewind, slow play, tried everything, but no matter how many times I went over that stretch of tape, it wasn't there anymore. The arm was gone, like it had never been. My mom tried to comfort me. She just gave me this look and said, "You always did have imaginary friends." But Lottie wasn't imaginary. She couldn't have been. I remember the way her hair smelled like coconut oil. I remember her sandals that squeaked. I remember crying when she had to go away. Except, I can't remember what house she lived in, or what her last name was, or if I ever saw her with her parents. Now, I've read things about how memory works, about how the brain can fill in gaps, especially in children. That maybe I just played alone that summer and made up a friend to fill the space. That my brain painted her in after the fact. That I just thought I saw her in that old footage because I wanted to. That's possible. I get that. That's the rational part. But still, why did I see her once on the tape? Just once? Sure, it was grainy footage, and the quality of these tapes was never that good, and years in attic storage had only made the quality worse. But why do I remember her so clearly? More clearly than I remember some of my real-life classmates. That's the bit that really gets me. Anyway, that's it, I guess. Like I said, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just a trick of the mind, like the Mandela effect. Or maybe it's just a mix of nostalgia and fuzzy video footage stirring up old imaginings. Or maybe some memories aren't really ours to keep. Maybe some of them don't want to stay forgotten. Hey, it's me again. The lady with the friend I remembered from an old VHS tape. I hope it's okay that I'm calling back so soon. Honestly, I've been turning this whole thing over in my mind nonstop, and I guess I just need to talk it out again. Maybe it'll help make some sense of it all. I couldn't stop thinking about that girl, my old friend. The gap-toothed grin, those bright rubber bracelets wrapped up her arm. It was so fleeting, like a blink, but so real at the same time. I just kept picturing her face, that mischievous little smile. I realized I needed to know more. So I called my older sister. She's the one who usually grounds me when I start spiraling into weird thoughts. She's lived in the house longer, remembers more from when we were kids. I figured if anyone would know whether I had a friend called Lottie, real or made up, it'd be her. She picks up, and we chat a bit. I told her about cleaning up Mom's house, finding the old VHS tapes, and the girl. I brought it up casually. Hey, do you remember when we were little, if I had an imaginary friend named Lottie? At first, she asked me if maybe it was just stress or too much time alone with those old tapes. She said she didn't remember me ever having an imaginary friend like that, at least not one that looked like her. But after a long pause, she said something that sent chills right down my spine. She doesn't laugh, doesn't say I'm being weird. She just goes quiet for a bit. Then she says, "That name sounds familiar, but I don't think you made her up." That got my heart going. She said she sometimes thought there was something in the house when we were kids. Something she could feel, but never quite see clearly. A presence that lingered in corners or just beyond her vision. She told me she occasionally caught glimpses of a small figure darting out of sight when she looked directly. A girl, maybe around our age back then, but no one we ever knew. She said Mom always brushed off her stories, saying it was just shadows or imagination, or old houses playing tricks on us. But my sister admitted she never really believed Mom. She thinks there might have been something real, maybe tied to the house, or the land it was built on. That really shook me, because I'd always thought it was just me. A trick of the tape, a forgotten childhood game. She mentioned the old swimming pool in the garden, the one that had been filled in before we moved there. Neighbors used to whisper about it being haunted, said you could sometimes hear soft murmuring or laughter coming from the bushes near where it used to be, especially at night. I thought back to playing outside as a kid, making mud pies near the garden, near that area. I wondered if the girl was connected to that place somehow, like a memory trapped in the stone and dirt. Then she said something that gave me chills, that there was a time Mom asked who I was whispering to in the dark. Apparently, I used to talk at night, low and soft, like I was listening to someone just off the bed. And I'd always say, "Lottie doesn't like to be seen." Anyway, we talked for a while. Neither of us could say for sure what was memory and what might have just been one of those childhood things. But it shook me. Later that night, I stayed over at Mom's place to keep sorting through old boxes and photos. I was wiped out, and I crashed on the living room couch with the TV on for background noise. I slipped one of the old VHS tapes into the player, one with memories from decades ago and a fuzzy, yet grainy picture like a warm blanket of memories being draped over me as I was half asleep, fixated on the flickering static. I was halfway dozing when the tape ended, and the screen went completely black for a moment. That's when I saw her. In the reflection on the blank TV screen, standing right behind me, just for a second. She was there, grinning wide, gap-toothed, and bright-eyed, with those same colorful rubber bracelets on her arm. My heart jumped into my throat. I whipped around, but there was no one. Just the quiet living room, the soft hum of the TV, and the faint creak of the old house settling. I sat frozen for a minute, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or my mind playing games. But it felt like more than that. Like she was watching me. Waiting. Sleep didn't come easy after that. The next morning, I asked Mom if she remembered anything strange from when we were kids. She gave me a tight smile and said, "It's an old house. Old houses have old stories. Sometimes people see what they want to see, or their minds fill in the gaps." I don't know what to make of it all. Part of me thinks it was just a lonely child's imagination, a forgotten game with an invisible friend. But another part of me wonders if she was something else entirely. Something that never left. Since then, I've been afraid to watch that tape again, but also kind of drawn to it. Like if I don't look, I'll lose her forever. But if I do, maybe I'll finally understand. Anyway, thanks for listening again. I guess I'm just hoping talking about it will help. Or maybe someone else out there has had a similar experience. I still don't know if she was a ghost, a memory, or something in between. But every time I watch that tape, I can't help but feel she's still watching me back. Whatever she was, she left a mark I can't erase. And I'm not sure I want to know what that means.
This happened about 2 years ago. My wife and I had just had our first baby, a little girl. We were living in this old rental house. Nothing fancy, but it was in a quiet neighborhood. Big trees lining the street. That kind of place. The house itself had a bit of a history, I guess. It was one of the oldest on the block, built in the 1920s. Had that creaky floor thing going on, drafty windows, weird little storage spaces you don't really see in modern houses. The kinds of things that people say give a place character, you know? With the baby's arrival imminent, I was trying to save a bit of money anywhere I could, so we had acquired a lot of hand-me-down things from family and friends. I got the crib from a cousin, a few boxes of clothes and toys came from my wife's friends, little bits of odds and ends came in from all over. Hard to tell where everything came from after a while. Anyway, after we brought the baby home, we set up a baby monitor in the nursery. Not the video kind, just the old-school audio type. It was a second-hand one we had gotten in one of these boxes from someone, but it worked fine. Just gave off that little bit of white noise when it was on. Nothing unusual. At first, a couple of weeks in, I started noticing odd things. It would pick up little noises at night, static shifting in weird ways, like someone barely moving around. I brushed it off, figured it was just picking up interference, maybe a neighbor's monitor on the same frequency, or someone's garage door opener, or something. But then, one night, I woke up to it. A whisper. I was dead asleep, and then I wasn't. You ever have that? Where you just wake up for no reason, like something pulled you out of a dream? The monitor was on the nightstand, and I swear I heard it, low, right at the edge of hearing. Shh, don't wake her. I sat up so fast I nearly knocked the darn thing over. My wife was still asleep. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of rain outside. I stared at the monitor, heart pounding, waiting to hear it again. Nothing. I got up, went straight to the nursery. The baby was fine, asleep. Room was empty, window locked. I stood there for a long time, just listening. The only sound was the hum of the monitor. Finally, I convinced myself I imagined it. I was exhausted. Sleep deprivation does weird things to your head, right? But then, a few nights later, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just one whisper. I woke up to what sounded like a full-on conversation. Faint. Garbled. Like two voices whispering back and forth. I couldn't make out words, but I knew it wasn't static. There was rhythm to it. Structure. Like someone talking in the next room, but just out of reach. I grabbed the monitor and walked straight to the nursery. As soon as I stepped in, the voices stopped. Dead silence. Just the baby sleeping peacefully in her crib. I checked the whole house, windows, doors, even looked outside in the yard with a flashlight. Nothing. That night, I just laid in bed thinking about what I had heard earlier on the monitor. I knew that I hadn't been getting a full night of sleep since the baby had come home. I knew I was probably just tired, but what if there was something more to the sounds? What if they weren't just in my head? The next day, I did some digging, just to put my mind at ease. I looked up the house's history, trying to see if maybe, I don't know, something had happened there. Couldn't find much. Just the usual turnover of families, people moving in and out over the years. Nothing weird, no tragic deaths, no old ghost stories passed down from the neighbors. But still, something felt off. I started keeping a notebook, writing down every time I heard something strange. Some nights there was nothing. Others I'd hear little noises, soft creaks, shuffling sounds, that strange whispering that never quite made sense. But the worst night? That was the night I finally heard it clear as day. I was up late, reading in bed while my partner slept. The monitor was on, just soft static in the background. Then, out of nowhere, "Are they sleeping?" My blood ran cold. The voice was soft, female, right there, through the monitor, clear as if someone was standing in the room. I didn't even think. I jumped out of bed, ran to the nursery, threw the door open. The room was empty. Just the baby, still sleeping. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I told my wife everything. She hadn't heard any of it. Thought maybe I was dreaming or hearing outside noises, but I could tell it unsettled her too. We switched the monitor out for a new one, hoping that maybe it was just a faulty device. For a while, things were quiet, no whispers, no strange sounds. I started thinking maybe it really was just interference. Then one night, as I was rocking the baby to sleep, I felt it. A breath. Right next to my ear. I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. The room was completely still, but I swear I could feel someone standing right behind me. Close. Too close. I turned my head slow. Nothing there. Just empty space. That was it. The next morning, we moved the crib into our bedroom. I didn't care how cramped it made things. I wasn't letting her sleep in that room alone anymore. A month later, we broke the lease early and got the heck out of that house. I don't know what it was. Maybe just an old house. Maybe a baby monitor picking up random radio signals. Maybe exhaustion messing with my head. But sometimes, when I think back to it, I remember the way that voice sounded. And I wonder, if I hadn't gone into that room when I did, what would it have said next?
Hello. I hope you're still taking these late calls. Or whatever this is. I'm not one to normally speak into a machine, but something's been gnawing at me ever since I came back home, and, well, it won't leave me alone. Thought I'd share what happened. This happened a few months ago. I'd taken a short break from work, nothing dramatic, just burnout, I guess, and went to stay with distant relatives for a while. They live out in a very quiet, rural part of the country. Lots of fields and old banyan trees, the kind of place where you hear crickets more than car horns. It was meant to be peaceful, and for the most part, it was. But the thing that sticks with me, what I keep thinking about even now, was this well. Or maybe I should say hole. It barely looked like anything. No bucket, no rope. No proper structure above it. Just an old stone lining sunk into the earth, round and low, maybe 4 feet across. Cracked and mossy, ringed by weeds and creepers. Half covered in fallen leaves and dried twigs, like the land had been trying to forget it. My relatives said nobody used it anymore, not for years. There's plumbing now, tanks and bore-wells. This old thing was just a leftover. Still, I felt drawn to it somehow. Like I kept catching it out of the corner of my eye. It sat at the edge of the backyard, half sunken into a small slope behind the shed, shielded by a cluster of wild trees and a crumbling wall. If you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't see it. But once I did, I kept going back. Just to look. The first time I heard the murmuring, I thought I was imagining it. It was one of those nights when the electricity had cut out. Happens often out there. The air gets thick when the fans stop spinning, and even the shadows feel heavier. I had stepped outside for air and wandered back behind the shed without really thinking about it. The moon was half full, enough to cast everything in pale silver. That's when I heard it. A low sound. Not a voice, not quite. Just murmuring. Like someone talking softly, right on the edge of hearing. You know how it sounds when people are talking in another room, and you can't make out the words but you know they're speaking? It was like that. Except it was coming from the well. It stopped the moment I stepped closer. Just silence. The frogs, the wind, even the trees, all of it paused, like they were listening too. I told myself it was probably water shifting underground. Echoes bouncing through the stone. The air pressure changing after the heat. There's a lot of rational reasons for weird sounds out in the countryside. But I don't know. It felt intentional, somehow. I didn't tell anyone. It felt silly. Like I'd be laughed at, or was, pitied. City girl scared of an old well, that kind of thing. But that wasn't the only night. I heard it again a few days later. I hadn't even gone near it that time. I was just brushing my hair by the window after dinner, and there it was, drifting in through the open screen. That same soft murmur. Gentle, but steady. Like something deep and ancient had started speaking and never stopped. This time I thought, okay, maybe some animals down there. Frogs or a trapped bird. So I went out the next morning to look proper. Sun was up, birds were chirping again, everything felt normal. I brought a flashlight and leaned in, carefully. It was deep. Too deep to see the bottom. Just a cold draft rising up from inside, and the faint smell of damp stone and leaf rot. No sounds. No animal noises. No movement. And definitely no frogs. Still, I made excuses. Maybe there were gaps in the stone that funneled in wind and played tricks on my ears. Maybe nearby leaves were brushing together in a way that carried oddly through the well's shape. I kept repeating all that in my head. But that night, I couldn't convince myself anymore. The murmuring came again, louder. Not loud in volume, exactly. But clearer. Like it had gotten closer somehow. Like whoever, or whatever, was making the sound had moved up a few stones. Still not words. Still just that unintelligible, flowing whisper. But there was rhythm to it. Pacing. Emotion, even. Like sorrow. Or pleading. I remember standing there frozen by the window, holding my breath without meaning to. Then something changed in the sound. A shift. A moment of stillness, then one single syllable that almost did sound like a word. I don't even know what it was. But it startled me so much I dropped the hairbrush I was holding. The next morning, I went out again, this time with salt in my pocket. It's something my grandmother taught me years ago. She used to say the old places remember. That wells and thresholds and banyan trees are not just land, they're thresholds. Places where things linger. I still didn't believe, not really. But when I looked down into the well that day, it felt like the silence was waiting. Like it noticed me. The air inside felt heavier. Colder, despite the sun. I didn't drop the salt in. Didn't chant anything. Just stood there and listened for a while. I left a few days later. I didn't go back to the well again. No one else seemed to notice anything strange. When I finally mentioned it to my cousin, offhand, jokingly, they said maybe I'd heard groundwater shifting. That the monsoon changes the underground flow sometimes. That old stone amplifies and warps noise. All reasonable things. All explanations that should have put my mind at ease. But the sound I heard, it wasn't water. Or air. Or echo. It was a presence. And even now, weeks later, when I lie in bed at night with everything quiet, I still sometimes hear it. Not from outside, not from the walls. Just in my head. That same low murmur, rising up through the memory of stone. I don't know if I'll ever go back. Part of me wants to, just to prove it wasn't real. But the rest of me knows better. Anyway, I'm sure it sounds like I just let the dark get to me. Maybe I did. Maybe rural silence is just too much for a city brain. But if you ever find yourself in a place like that, in the real quiet, the old kind, keep an eye on the places that feel forgotten. Sometimes they haven't forgotten you.
That's it for this episode of Phantom Phone Line. If you enjoyed tonight's tales, don't forget to subscribe to Phantom Phone Line and share this with a friend who loves the unusual and unexplained. If you have a story to share about something unexplainable, check our website at www.phantomphoneline.com for submission instructions. This episode is part of Season 0, featuring dramatized tales of the supernatural. You've reached the end of tonight's connection. The views and opinions expressed are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast producers, affiliates, or sponsors. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice or services of any kind. Listeners should exercise caution, seek professional advice if needed, and are encouraged to draw their own conclusions. Viewer-listener discretion is advised. Some content may be disturbing, sensitive, or triggering to certain audiences. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations is purely coincidental. Some parts of this content may feature elements that were created, altered, enhanced, or modified using digital production tools, techniques, or other advanced production methods, including synthetic or automated processes. All content is the property of Phantom Phone Line and may not be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form without prior written consent.